Hey guys, this is Jacob from the Tripod, where we break down every NRL game every week from a punting perspective. This week was round 10. We went 7 and 5 on our best bets. Alex is not available to join me tonight, but gives me the opportunity to bring our good friend Clarkey from Clarkey's Rugby League column onto the show. He shares his insights into the games of round 10, and because it is the midway point in this 20-week season, I asked him a question on all 16 teams looking forward to the second half of the season. Okay, so the first game we get to talk about was the grand final rematch. It was the Raiders 24 who upset the Roosters 20. We had one best bet on the Raiders, so we won that. It was an incredible comeback when you consider everything that was against Ricky's men. I don't know about you. Could you believe, Clarkey, that they came back and won after that first half?
Yeah, it was such a close game all throughout. It come down to who wanted it more. And the Raiders just obviously, with what happened to Josh Papali, the elbow there, which allowed the Roosters to get ahead by that penalty goal. And from there, you sort of had the feeling that they poked the bear and Papali explodes over. And he's done that so many times. I think back to like the Storm last year when he crashed over to beat them. He's one man you don't want to upset. The Roosters made that mistake, and that was a really, really fantastic grand final rematch.
It's funny you talk about Papali. He's reminding people he is a monster. He's as good as any prop in the game, I reckon. And that game did remind me of the Storm win last week from the toughness they showed. Not last week, last year. The game where they won at AAMI Park where they were down 18-0. They came back. Now, this game, I think their biggest deficit, they were down 12-6, but they didn't have the ball for a 15-minute period in that first half. They were completely up against it. I thought they'd get gassed with all the players out. Now, because we're at the midway point of the season, I wanted to ask a general question about each of the 16 teams. So let's talk about the Raiders. And you got your inside info sometimes, and you got your ear to the ground. Cody Harawira-Naera this week came out saying he doesn't want to play for the Dogs. There's whispers that he could be an option for the Raiders. I feel like he'd be tailor-made to replace what they've lost in Bateman. But in saying that, has Bateman officially ruled out, or is there a chance the Raiders could bolster their team with a couple of those players?
Yeah, well, Bateman's definitely gone for 2021. He could still play this year. The shoulder, I believe he had complications and had a small infection in it, and he had to go back in and have surgery again, I believe. So unfortunately, his time frame just keeps getting pushed back and back and back. But he's been gone for a long time now. At the hospital, the specialist actually said to him, so am I sending these reports back to the UK? And I mean, you don't say that to someone unless they're going back to the UK. So I think if he had it his way, he might have gone back this year. But regardless, if they can land CHN, Harawira-Naera, that is a fantastic signing. He probably offers a little bit of a different angle of attack to John Bateman. John Bateman's sort of, your workhorse, can have the early hit up, can run an edge. Whereas Harawira-Naera is that really dangerous player that has an offload that hits the edges really well. And I almost think, as great as John Bateman is, a player like CHN will benefit the Raiders more, particularly because you have Hodgson controlling everything from the middle at hooker there. You have two running halves that are always taking it to the line, and then you factor in a player like CHN running off them into those outside gaps. It certainly creates a lot of options and points of attack for the Raiders, which can really trouble defenses. But nothing official yet. I believe the Bulldogs are waiting to see if they can land Trent Barrett. If they can land Trent Barrett, they believe he might be able to convince him to stay. They had a little bit of time together there at the Panthers. But as it stands right now, he's as good as gone. He actually followed the Raiders last night on Instagram, which, whilst, it's a little bit high schoolish, like, oh, he followed her, she followed him, whatever. You wouldn't just go and follow the Raiders unless there was, you know what I mean? I can't see him
when there's smoke, there's fire sometimes. Now, you mentioned Hodgson. They've lost him, but something else we should mention if people didn't see the second half is Tom Starling. He adds a spark and some speed from the hooker role. Havili is a very different player to Hodgson, but very solid as well. And you talk about if they were to get Harawira-Naera and his offload to the attack, do you still believe the Raiders could get back to the grand final based on that performance and based on who could join this team?
Based on that performance, yes. But I really hate to base, what could happen in the future, based on one game. And an example for that is the Broncos winning last week. I had people messaging me saying they're back as a top 8 team. That's obviously been proven very, very differently 1 week later. So I hate to base it off one game, but they did look fantastic there. If they can continue that form, really galvanise, play with each other when they're down on troops, similar to how the Seagulls did last year for Desi Hasler. They obviously wanted to win for Ricky. It meant a lot to the club. If they can continue that, take momentum from that game, obviously, like we spoke about, they get Bateman, a couple others back through the year, then yeah, it's still too early to put a pencil through the Raiders, in my opinion.
And we'll get to the Broncos later. Now, speaking of not ruling out a team based on one performance, the Roosters, when they're at their best, have looked unbeatable in 2020. But it's crazy to think they've lost 4 games this year out of 10. So how do you think they're going to go this year? You still think they're the favourites to win the comp? And if they do have a weakness, I mean, they've showed they can be beaten. What is that weakness that you see? Yeah,
I think their weakness is silly errors and not completing sets. And it's something that if you go back through the NRL statistics over 2018 and 2019, they struggled with it as well. The reason it's not been addressed is because they have so many and have had so many attacking weapons. First it was Latrell, then it was Joseph Manu, now it's the Morris brothers, it's Tedesco. They have all these attacking threats where they can afford to knock the ball on. Their defense is so great that they can defend their line. And once they're attacking, they're going to score points eventually. It's usually a matter of if the Roosters defend well, they will win a game. You look at their final series, I believe it was the 2018 and 2019, throughout the whole final series, only the Cronulla Sharks in round 1 of the finals scored 2 tries against them. Every other team, I believe, is 8 or less. So when they go and leak 24 points against the Raiders, yes, they have fantastic attack. However, you can pile in the errors that we spoke about, and suddenly 24 points is a big, big ask, particularly when we go into some players that were out there. In particular, I would say, no Latrell Mitchell anymore. That's a huge strike weapon gone from the centres. It's a big option gone there. But most importantly, Cooper Cronk out, that element of experience and guiding your team through the tight moments. And then injuries at the moment, Victor Radley, Nat Butcher out, etc. So there's a couple of factors there. But the Roosters are that good. It's going to take a couple of factors like that to sort of build up to get a win over them, I believe.
I totally agree. The 4 losses they have had, let's be fair, they were all close losses. So they were in all those games, and the common trend was low completion rate. It just goes to show nobody's unbeatable. That's what makes the 2020 competition so exciting. A side that I believe also could hoist the trophy in, I think, October, or will it be November by the time we wrap this up, is the Storm. They won 42-6 against the Titans. The pod had one best bet, Storm to score 30 or more. They got, 42. Munster announced his return back to the NRL with the first try. They are loving life on the sunny coast. There was a massive gulf in class between these two teams. Was there anything in this game that stood out to you?
Nothing really stood out to me and nothing really surprised me. The Titans tried hard for the first 20, but when you have players like Cameron Smith just slowly picking apart your defense, picking the weaknesses, just to that first try, like you just spoke about with Munster, Cameron Smith could see that the Titans were sliding and shifting early. So he gives his 5'8" a bullet ball to the line and he just goes straight over. Not many hookers have that vision, and not many 5'8" like Cameron Munster take the ball to the line to that extent where that becomes an option. So when you just get outclassed like that, and there was situations like that all throughout this game, big learning curve for the Titans, and the Storm did exactly what they were expected to do, and that's dominate a lowly ranked opposition.
Speaking of that lowly ranked opposition, we're actually going to do a bonus segment, not right now, talking about the Titans, their future, the FIFITA situation. I'm really keen to get your thoughts on it, so we'll save that one. We'll tease ahead. Just quickly, do you agree that the Storm can win the comp this year, whether it be Cam Smith's last year or not? I'm not sure, but even though they may be stuck on the sunny coast the rest of the season, do you believe they can seriously win the comp?
Yeah, I think they can. I think you're silly if you ever rule out a team coached by Craig Bellamy and captained by Cameron Smith. There's greatness between those two, and I just think, you're silly to rule them out. They can definitely win this comp.
Some people did rule them out a few weeks ago, but you look, they've won down in Canberra. They beat the Roosters, and they took care of business in that one. Now, speaking of outclassed, Tigers 48, Broncos 0. We did not have a best bet on this game, but I did win my side bet against Alex. I was on the Tigers -5.5. Now, the Broncos, as you said, they crashed back to earth. They beat the Dogs. And I tried to point this out on Wednesday. It was only the Dogs, and the Dogs played terrible in round 9. And after everything the Broncos have endured in the last couple of months, you wouldn't think they'd come out complacent. But boy, they were second best all night. It was honestly painful to watch. What do you make of this game?
It's tough to make anything of it. I mean, they lost within the first 15 minutes. They were still in the dressing room whilst the Tigers intent. The energy was there. I believe the Broncos got dominated in post-contact meters. As you say, second to everything all night at Leichhardt Oval. Benji Marshall firing. It's just a massive reality check for the Broncos. I'm not sure if it was complacency, like you said, but you have to ask, what really else can it be? How do you, go from defeating the Broncos and everyone smiles and everyone's happy and your fans are saying, we're back, we're going to finish top 8, we're going to scrape in, and then, we'll have all our players back and we'll go from there. And the issue that I have with the Broncos is, look at the Bulldogs, for example. We'll talk about them next, yeah? They lost to the Dragons and they were expected to lose, but the scoreline was tight and they were fighting until the 80th minute. They tried their hardest. Injuries or not, complacency or not, can the Broncos players really look each other in the eye in the dressing rooms after that and say, hey, I tried my hardest for you tonight? I don't think they can. And I think you put Billy Slater, Cooper Cronk, and Cameron Smith in for the Broncos there. Greatest trio of all time. You can't turn that scoreline around. Nothing can turn that scoreline around in terms of players. It comes back to sort of culture, identity, and wanting to play for the player beside you. Nothing else matters right now for the Broncos. And Anthony Seibold, he's walking on eggshells because that's just not on a 48-0 loss.
That's right. It's not just the losses. It's the manner in which they're losing. They're dead set getting embarrassed. Now, let's look back at it. So they've played 10 games. They've won 3. Yes, like Matt Lodge, Alex Glenn, Katoni Staggs, Dave Fifita should all be back in this team, let's say, in the next 3 or 4 weeks. What do they need to do? Is there anything they can do for Seibold basically to salvage his job where there would be any level of confidence that he's the right man to steer them forward 2021 and beyond?
I think it starts with their starts. Like I spoke about there, they lost this game in the first 15 minutes. And once you look at the scoreboard, you're 15 minutes in, you're already down by 2 or 3 tries. Because these Broncos players are young and inexperienced, it is easier at the highest level of rugby league to sort of drop your head and think, there's always next week. But if you can start well and you can fight and you're in the arm wrestle, then these younger players grow in confidence. Payne Haas wants the next hit up. Dave Fifita wants to do that miraculous try to get his team in front. But, you have to put yourself in their shoes. If you're Payne Haas and your team's down by 30 points, no player would ever say this, but are you really having that next hit up as hard as you can and fighting for every meter? At that stage, you're just going through your processes. You're trying not to miss your tackles and you're trying to complete sets. You're not trying to score even because you're down by 30 or whatever. So I think it's really their start. The first 10 minutes, it doesn't get any easier, unfortunately, for them next week against the Storm. But if I was Seibold, my focus this week would be the first 10, 20 minutes, really trying to lay a platform and then seeing what the boys like Milford and their outside backs with the strike, see what they can produce from there.
Yeah, they've got no chance next week. I'll give you the hot tip right now. Yeah. But maybe with the 9 games after that, I think they'd need to win 5 of 9. Like, they'd need to get these players back. They'd need to put results on the board. They'd need to totally adjust their attitude. And I don't buy that, they have to start well. That's not good enough. They have to be able to face adversity, like you say, and actually get out of it. That's what the good teams can do. Now, let's talk about the Tigers. Are they a good team? They have the longest finals drought of any club. They're currently 7th, but they are perennially 9th on the ladder. My question to you is simply, do they make the finals in 2020?
Well, we've seen them get up for some big games this year, but then we've also seen them look very, very poor in some big games this year. So at this stage for the Tigers, for me, they're in that sort of 7th to 10th mark. I'm not certain they'll play finals. I'm not certain they'll miss finals, but I am certain they won't be creeping up towards the top 4. So therefore, I'd honestly have to say it's a flip of the coin. If they can get into the finals and Maguire can get them in the right mind frame and attitude, obviously like they were on Friday night, then yeah, they are a chance to do something in this comp. But it's whether they can actually get there first. And I'm not convinced. I think the Tigers are a coin flip this year.
Yeah, I'm going to say they will finish 9th again, as cruel as that is. I think Manly, who are outside the 8, will get and take their spot and will get to Manly. And I think the Tigers will come to the end of the season and look back and say, we were up 10 in the second half against the Titans. We didn't win that game. Those are the games that cost you final spots, in my opinion. Dragons 28 on Saturday afternoon now. Dogs 22. This was a crazy game. The Dragons scored on the first set of the match. They led 10-0, and you're thinking they're going to win by 30 or 40. The Dogs then put on 22 unanswered points, looking spirited under Georgalis. But then the Dragons in the final act, 3 tries, final 15, including a dropped ball in the final minute, into Normie's lap by the Dogs. He returned at 40 metres for the game. So in the context of the Dragons season, that's a huge win. They have won 4 of their last 6 games. What did you make of that one?
Yeah, it was obviously a really important win for the Dragons. Probably unlucky for Bulldogs. I'd make the argument the Bulldogs were the better team for majority of this game. Like you said, Dragons won the first 15 and they won the last 15. But all throughout the rest of that game, it was all doggies. You can make the case it was unlucky, but if you're shifting the ball and your center's knocking it on, and not just a little fumble where he recovers it, like knocking it straight into the opposition, it's unlucky for the Bulldogs. I kind of feel for them, but then I kind of ask, why are you spreading it like... I don't know. They at that stage, it was 22 all. I would have thought you play towards a kick, let's go to golden point here, because no matter what, we're not getting close enough for a field goal shot. It was fourth tackle or something. So I suppose with 4 off the field, maybe there was the inexperience there. The Dragons, it's a win, but I wouldn't take anything from that. It's a very scrappy win against the currently 16th place team that have only won, I believe, 1 game all year. So I wouldn't take too much away from it if I was Dragons. If I was the Bulldogs, I'd be proud of the effort. But you have to lament on silly errors there from them also. So
yeah, if you're judging how good the Dragons are, you're not going to say like that was an impressive win. But the fact that they did come back from down 12, I think within the clubhouse, it could mean a lot to them, especially that they have pulled out some wins. And from where they began in the first 4 weeks of this season without winning a game to, as I said, winning 4 of 6 now, they've got the Sharks next week. It's a winnable game. I mean, they have not given up on finals footy hopes either. I don't know if like Clune and Norman are a halves pairing that beats the top 8 sides, and I don't think they'll make it, but they've got belief. Let's talk about the Dogs. I think 2020 is kind of over. They've sacked Dean Pay, right? But news came out in the week that they've signed Nick Kotrick. I like that signing. I think that he is a star outside back, and you're getting a guy who's probably even yet to hit his prime. We know they've got a war chest of up to $3 million to spend on players. Are there any other players off contract or in the mix who you believe they need to sign to improve their squad further for 2021 and beyond?
Yeah, I honestly haven't thought about this, but straight away I can tell you, if they get Trent Barrett and he comes from Penrith, last time he left the Panthers, he took Appy Coruscant, who was an international at the time, and he took Lewis Brown, who was playing for New Zealand at the time. So he's shown in the past that when he leaves the Panthers, he's not afraid to take a player or two. This time, instead of going for experience, I think he should go for youth. There's players there, and I did do a post on this, the top 6 players he could potentially bring over. And that wasn't to suggest I had any evidence, but Charlie Staines is one. You know, if you can get him playing centre, fullback, or wing, you do it. Matt Burton is another one. Matt Burton right now is currently, in my opinion, better than any half at that club, including Kieran Foran. Jack Hetherington, great middle forward, brings energy and enthusiasm. What are the Dogs lacking in some areas? A little bit of, I wouldn't say effort, I would say energy and enthusiasm. Spencer Lanu, another great young player, played front row with Payne Haas for the New South Wales Under-20s Blues. Mitch Kenny at hooker and Billy Burns in the back row. Now that's just 6 players that are young guns coming through the Panthers ranks in and out of first grade. Could Trent Barrett say to them, come with me to the Bulldogs and I will guarantee you will be in my 17 or you will have a starting role. And I'll give you until round 10 or whatever to prove yourself. You know, obviously you can't guarantee the whole year, but you guarantee them a spot in that 17. That's got to get the young player confidence. And we've seen, in rugby league, a contract isn't worth the paper it's signed on. These young guns might be locked into the Panthers for 3 or 4 more years, but we both know if they both go and say, hey, I want to release for family reasons, whatever, the NRL will sign off on it and they'll be gone. So I think if Trent Barrett gets there, go for youth, try to blend it with a little bit of experience, but it starts with the Panthers. You have to raid the young stocks there.
Now, I thought that was a really awesome post that you put up and made a great point there. And I know that the Panthers will be desperate for him to not do that and surely have said to him, if we're going to release you to be a head coach, you're not going to be poaching. But what it comes down to, those guys you talked about, especially Charlie Staines, who is a fullback, Matt Burton, who's, maybe keeps growing into a lock, but at the moment is a gun 5'8", they don't fit in the current Panthers 17. Like the Panthers' current squad is playing so well. These kids want to play first grade. You look at Kalen Ponga, he didn't want to leave the Cowboys, but they weren't ready. I forget who was the fullback.
Lachlan Coote.
yeah, Lockie Coote was there and they just made a grand final. They didn't want to displace him. So there is a huge opportunity there. I think that's something really worth keeping an eye on. Let's move to the next game. It was also crazy. And it was an unnecessary sweat for us from a betting perspective because we were on the Knights. They did win 20-18, but they were winning 20-0. After 50 minutes, they looked bang up for the game, dominating in all facets. Somehow the game just flipped. We only went 2-1 on our best bets. The Rabbitohs scored 18 points in a 7-minute span that also included a disallowed try off a fumbled put down under the sticks. That could have been 24 in 7 minutes. So exciting finish for sure. Did you enjoy that one?
I enjoyed that one, but I did have money on the Knights myself with a Bradman Best anytime try. So I was definitely nervous and in ways thankful that Tom Burgess, knocked that ball on over the try line. Fantastic finish by the Rabbitohs. That's the attacking flair. And I had a friend over. We're watching this game, and he's a big Knights fan. And I said to him, "Look, we're up 20-0 here, but you can't get complacent against the Rabbitohs, and you can't think you're going to defend your way to victory because they are such a fantastic attacking unit. They will tear you up very quickly." I said, you can't get complacent here. You got to keep playing football. The Knights, they stopped playing football. They thought, well, we're up 20. Let's just defend here. And you can't do that against the Rabbitohs. They gained momentum. And I would honestly say if there was 5 more minutes left in this game, Rabbitohs had it. They looked on fire. The Knights made a big, big error. They went to sleep, tried to defend their way to victory. You got to keep playing footy against the Bunnies. Great effort by both teams, though.
Yeah, I thought we saw the good, the bad, and the ugly of these sides. Like you saw what the Knights can do in that first 50, but you also saw that they didn't put the Rabbitohs to the sword. The best teams do. And for the Rabbitohs, they were really poor, and they made so many mistakes in the first half and even to begin the second half. But then they showed the ability they do have in their comeback, although they fell just short. Speaking of the Knights, Daniel Saifiti was not in for this game. Edric Lee's got a broken arm at the moment. Glasby, I'm not sure if he's injured or he's just not in their strongest 17. And I know they've signed Frizzell for next year. So there's potential for this team to get better. Adam O'Brien's first season. But let me ask you about 2020. Like, how far do you think this team can go?
Oh, I could see them comfortably within the top 8. I won't say top 4 because there's so many big players. Straight away, just off the top of my head, you got Eels, Roosters, Storm. So that leaves one spot left in the top. And Penrith, yeah,
just
correct.
With the way they're going, yeah.
Yeah, and the draw that the Panthers have as well. So realistically, that should be the top 4. There's 4 other spots. The Knights, they can definitely finish close to the top 4, as high as 5th, I would say. I think they'll play finals this year for the first time in a while. I think Adam O'Brien's a really, really good coach, and he's been in plenty of final series, albeit as an assistant coach for the Storm and the Roosters over the last decade. So experience as far as that counts.
I agree with you. Yeah, if you get to 5th or 6th, you're hosting that final, that elimination final. And I think if they were to win that, I think that this team is improving each week. The culture has changed, and they would be a tough out for even when they do come up against one of those top 4 sides in an elimination final, let's say in the second week. What about the Rabbitohs? Kind of same question. I know they were missing Latrell, Campbell Graham, Liam Knight yesterday, so those players will come back in. Do you believe they make the 8? If they do, can they make any noise in the finals?
I don't think they can make noise in the finals, unfortunately. And, just part of that has to be burnout. The last 2 years, they've been knocked out in the preliminary final, 1 game away from the grand final. Burnout, losing a couple players, Sam Burgess most notably. Again, I think they're like the Tigers. They're in that 7th to 10 bracket. I'm not certain they'll play finals, but I won't write them off entirely. And once they make finals, it's a flip of the coin, but I don't see them making too much noise in the final series.
Yeah, I like the Bunnies. I definitely believe that they will make the 8. I mean, they showed they were better than the Tigers when those two teams met a week ago. They're a bit like the Knights in that, like, maybe next year's their year. Jai Arrow's going to join this team. But, yeah, I won't write them off. We saw that they made a pretty admirable comeback yesterday, missing some gun outside backs. They can get better. Another team that's going to get better is Manly. Boy, they needed this win, and they got it yesterday. It surprised a lot of people. Now, if you're listening to the pod on Wednesday, we didn't have a best bet on Manly. We said we leaned towards them. But when the news came out on Friday that Madison was out, we jumped on Manly +10. Then Ferguson was also out. We had 2 best bets, in fact, and we only went 1-1. Our other best bet was the Eels to not score 3 tries in a row. They had 1 try after 65 minutes. They scored 3 tries in the final 15, including one with 2 seconds left. So we were on a team that's a double-digit underdog that wins outright. We go 1-1 on our best bets. But regardless of that, a massive win at Brookie. Remember, they're missing Turbo, Dylan Walker, Fanua, Blake. Were you more impressed by the Manly win, or were you more surprised by how poor Parramatta was?
I think the Eels were a little bit complacent, but I would take nothing away from the Sea Eagles. Getting a win against the ladder leading Eels. Eels, are they still number one? I'm not certain.
They are because they pulled back within 4 points. If they'd lost by 6 or more, they would have dropped from top.
Well, there you go. So they beat the team that's in number one, albeit without Mitchell Moses. You can't take nothing away from the Manly Sea Eagles. Last year, I continually tipped against them because of injuries. But they've shown us, and there's a precedent set over the past season and a half where it doesn't matter who is injured for this Manly side. Des Hasler has built a culture of pride for the jersey, and no matter who fills in, whether it was Sean Kepi last year making his debut in the final series and looking very well against the Sharks, they've all shown the jersey means a lot to them. Their teammates mean even more, and they just go out and play footy. And that sort of really startled the Eels. And like you say, great game, fantastic for both sides, more so the Sea Eagles. Eels, I think they might have missed the gun a little bit on this one.
Yeah, let's start with Parramatta. People will say this performance shows they're not the real deal. I would argue like everyone has flat games. You mentioned Mitchell Moses is out, Fergo was rested, Madison. Those are 3 Origin level players. So are you concerned with Parramatta, or you still think they're a genuine title threat?
Not concerned at all. You look at the Storm in 2017 when they won the premiership, they dropped the game to the Titans at Suncorp.
Mate, I tell you, in 100 years, historians are going to look back at that game and not going to be able to explain that Storm team that was unbeatable in 2017 gave up about 38 points to the Titans. That I'll never forget how they did that.
Yeah, I remember that. Probably the best game of footy I've ever watched, if I'm being honest. Complete shock. But it shows that even a team as great as the 2017 Storm, you're a little bit flat sometimes. You don't have your best day at work every single day. 100%. The Eels didn't have their best day at work.
And Manly, we talk about the players who are out. I know Sully picked up an injury, so I guess it remains to be seen how serious. If they get everyone back and they roll into the finals, how far could they go? Could they make a grand final?
They definitely could. They really could. With that forward pack they have of Thompson, Sirinen, Martin Tapau, and AFB, I mean, they're monsters. It's a fantastic forward pack, and they've shown last year in the final series and throughout that they can lay more than a suitable platform for players like Tom Trbojevic and Daly Cherry-Evans to take over the game.
And Trbojevic was close to the best player in the comp before he did get injured. So, I mean, it is a big if. He's had repeated injuries now, but if he was to get fully fit and be on the paddock, I reckon there'd be a team no one would want to play. So that was the Saturday night game last night. So people keep in mind we're recording this Sunday around midday. So you're going to hear this Sunday evening. So we're going to talk about the teams that are playing today. Just bear in mind we haven't seen the result today. So I'll ask a more general question. Now, for the New Zealand Warriors, 2020's been enormously trying. So realistically, they're not going to go too far this year. But what do you believe they're kind of missing to be successful in the future? And do you have a particular coach in mind you think would be the right one to steer them forwards?
I don't have a particular coach in mind, but I would be looking at someone like Sean Wayne. Now, not known to a lot of people, but he has signed as England's head coach. He's won premierships in the Super League with the Wigan Warriors. Now, why I'm interested in him is because the Super League is more attack orientated. And when you ask me what the Warriors are missing, for me, it's not a player and it's not a coach. It's identity. These Polynesian players grow up with fantastic, natural, instinctive rugby league, and it's taken out of them. Stephen Kearney tried to make the New Zealand Warriors a Melbourne Storm by getting them to complete sets, and that's not how the Warriors play their best football. When they made the grand final, it was James Maloney and Sean Johnson being unpredictable in the halves and not afraid to chance their arm. That's what the Warriors need. I put it on my Instagram story in a Q&A recently and said I believe they need to find their identity and need to not be playing for set completions, but playing for points. And you go back to the under-20s also, Jacob, where the defense is not as structured as NRL, and they were always at the top, the Warriors. Mm-hmm. So we bring in an attacking coach from Super League. He gives their players licenses to offload and play their freestyle of footy. And I can back this up by saying, I won't reveal the name, but a New Zealand Warriors player actually replied to my story in the Q&A and said, you're spot on. You should see some of the young freaks we have that come through this club, and they get coached out of their natural instincts. Let the boys play.
That's right. Talent's never usually been in question for them. I mean, they need to be more resilient because they're a team that plays on the back of confidence. We know how good they are. But when something goes against them, like when I'm watching the Warriors, I know if they're on, if they make an early error and then they defend it. Like if they can show that they're up for the game and not drop their heads. I mean, maybe they need a star half. They're talking about letting Green go. I mean, Harris Tavita, I don't know, can he be the kind of the next Johnson? They could use an extra middle forward. You're talking about letting the boys play. There's this rumor about the Walker brothers who currently coach the Ipswich Jets. Now, it might have just been made up, and people say that their style of coaching is quite gimmicky, but I would love to see that experiment. Let them go in there because they give their players free license. Do you have any opinion on the Walker brothers style of coaching? I think it's similar to what you're talking about with Sean Wayne.
Yeah, I think it worked for a stage there in the Queensland Cup until it didn't, because teams unfortunately start to pick up on it eventually. And when you know every dropout's going to be short, every kickoff's going to be short, everyone's going to be throwing around playing money ball football, you start to defend towards that. And then the question is sort of, what is your plan B? Because for a lot of teams, money ball football is their plan B. And when that's your plan A, what becomes plan B? Like structured fundamentals, you know what I mean? It sort of takes away that edge in a way. It was definitely effective in Queensland Cup level. I'm not certain, though, that style of football would be enough to beat the top tier teams of the NRL. But in saying that, you look at like a team like the Raiders, they disrupt the Storm because they don't play fundamental football. They, Jack White takes the line on and kicks early and Papali's scoring in the middle. So could work, could not. It's one of those things that I'd love to see, and I don't have an answer for how effective it could be.
Recent times is Cronulla Sharks. Now, this year's been really tough. A lot of controversy, injuries, suspensions, players moved on. People don't talk about the last few years being a golden era in Cronulla, but when you consider the squad that they had, they made multiple prelims. They obviously won the trophy in 2016. I mean, how many players are left from the premiership winning side? Off the top of my head, Wade Graham, Shad Townsend. I can't think of anyone else. Like, it's a whole new era for them. And the fact is, not every team is going to be great every year. But in saying all that, if they win today, and they are favourites, although we're not tipping them, they would be 7th or equal with 7th on points. So, like, do you think this year, with everything that's gone against them, they could still make the finals?
They definitely could. I'm not convinced they are. I mean, I hate to say it a third time, but they're in that 7 to 10 bracket for me also. I think they could. I'm not certain they are. As you say, the golden era for the Sharks appears to be over. I think they've made the finals the last 5 or 6 years in a row, but just going through their squad now, there's not many players left, and it really goes back to the forward pack. Their whole starting forward pack, the only player that actually was involved in those sort of golden era was Wade Graham. And, for me, he's the most important to them. I could tell you if Wade Graham went down injured tomorrow, Sharks will miss the finals. He is that important to their attack because when Sean Johnson and Chad Townsend aren't firing, Wade Graham can still ball play. He sits out wide. He can put in kicks. He can run the football to the line. He can play mate. He can do it all. He is so important to that team. It's no doubts that he was, no surprise that he was involved heavily in that golden era. But to go back to your question, again, 7th to 10th for me for the Sharks. They can, but I'm not convinced they will.
Yeah, Wade Graham is a fantastic player and fantastic leader, heart and soul. Of course, a player I forgot, Andrew FIFITA, was there then, still there, but he's out today with injuries and he's not quite the same player. Let's move on to another team whose golden era, I would say, has passed them by. The North Queensland Cowboys. They won the comp in 2015. They made a prelim 2016. They made the grand final in 2017. And again, it's just a matter that not every team can be good every year. That's how it goes in a salary cap era. But what do you think they're missing?
I think it starts with their coach, and unfortunately, it's not his fault that the players aren't performing on the field, but it is his fault that he's still using the same shape and structures he used to win the 2015 final. You look at the Cowboys attack, and although Michael Morgan's out, it's very predictable. It is, for the most part, Jake Clifford taking the ball to the line. You have your one prop running your angle across, and he goes backdoor to Scott Drinkwater. Can that create numbers out wide? Yeah, it can. Will it against teams like the Roosters and the Storm and the Panthers, who they've got today? I don't think so. Even more concerning for me, Jacob, their 5'8" today is Mitchell Dunn. I think that really doesn't add too much attack. I think they're in for a really long night tonight. I've got to tip the Panthers.
Yeah, it could be a cricket score if they don't turn up with a good attitude. Today, I think part of the problem is retaining talent. I mean, Kalen Ponga, I mentioned him before, he was on this team. Kickow was in the system of the Cowboys. Now
Brandon
they threw...
Smith.
Yep, Brandon Smith, exactly. Like, they threw big money at Tamalolo, and that's a great contract. But they've also thrown big money at Michael Morgan, Valentine Holmes, even McLean was a big recruit. So those players who are on big money need to perform. They haven't got the production out of those guys. That's a problem. Let's move to the Penrith Panthers. We've just mentioned that they're playing them down in Penrith today. And we gave out a tip a couple of weeks ago, the Panthers to win the minor premiership at $7. That gets juicier every week because the Roosters and Eels, who are both big threats, both lost as really short favourites this week, as long as the Panthers don't lose today, and I don't think they will. In fact, I think they're the most exciting team to watch in 2020, and the future is very bright. Look at the youth and the talent of this squad. But I want to know, do you believe this year, because I think that they're going to be a threat for multiple years, but do you believe this year they could genuinely win the comp?
I'm not convinced they can genuinely win the competition because you look at teams like the Roosters and the Storm. When they won their premierships, it was consistent finals appearances over and over. So they had the big game experience. They didn't have as bad a nerves. They knew what to expect. I don't know if the Panthers have that. And I think if you look back historically over the past decade, almost every team that did win the premiership was there in the finals at the prelim stage or thereabout consistently for leads for years until it finally led up to the premiership. Panthers don't necessarily have that. They missed the finals last year. But in saying that, if Dylan Edwards is playing his best football, if Api Coruscant's getting out of dummy half, if Nathan Cleary is playing fantastic, if Stephen Crichton is scoring around the edges, and I'm just scrolling down their team sheet here, and let's just culminate it all with, if Viliami Kikau is playing his best football, how can you honestly write them off? We can sit there and talk about what's happened in the past decade and what, the precedent that's sort of set, but no one expected this team to play finals this year either. And they've far exceeded expectation, and there's certainly evidence to suggest that they could go all the way. I don't want to write them off just yet. They could definitely win, but I don't think they will.
I think that's a completely fair point. I will say the pod, we did tip them to make the 8 this year. We saw potential, but I think a guy you didn't mention, but probably the buy of the year, Api Coruscant, really added another dimension to this team, exactly what they were missing. I think you're kind of right. It's a young team with heaps of confidence that is riding a wave right now. When they get to the finals, do they have another gear to go to that those class teams that know what it's all about, we know that they can lift? And you're right, like big game experience does matter in these tight, tough, warfare style finals matches. But it's still, I think Penrith this year is probably a little bit like Parramatta last year. You know that they're building towards something, but Parramatta had to take their lumps down in Melbourne last year to come back stronger. That could be the case with Penrith. But boy, in the regular season game, you still want to be careful if you're going to bet against them. Look, thanks again, Clarkey. So we have chatted about the 6 games so far that we've seen. We've chatted about all 16 teams, kind of what I've really appreciated getting your insight into what you've seen and what you foresee for the rest of 2020. We've talked about a few of the awesome posts that you're putting up on social media. It's interesting stuff. It's informative stuff. So again, follow Clarkey's Rugby League column. And I appreciate your time, bro. Enjoy the Sunday Arvo footy.
Thanks, man. It was a ripper.
Okay, it's me here, just barbecuing alone Sunday evening to discuss quickly the 2 games that finished this afternoon. And firstly, it was the Sharks 46-10 over the Warriors. We had 3 best bets. We won 1 and lost 2. We had overs, but we also had Warriors plays, and they got destroyed. And what did I say just before? You can tell where the Warriors are on when something goes against them early, whether they drop their heads or not. And after conceding a very early try, they come back down the other end. Fusitu'a, a miraculous move to keep the ball in play. Herbert just has to plant the ball, and we're a try each. He drops it, and they ruled that it was an advantage played by the Warriors. So it was Sharks ball. They scored that set. It was 12-0. It only got uglier and downhill from there. I think the Sharks had a game plan. They knew they could out-tough the Warriors. It looked like they did a lot to shut down RTS, but you also have to say about the Warriors, we've got it wrong in that maybe they are just ready for the season to be over. They've got teammates that they know are going home, so no good in that one. And finally, the Panthers 22 defeating the Cowboys 10. We had 2 best bets. You could say one was a little unlucky and one was extremely lucky. We went 1-1. We had Panthers to win both halves. First half's a tie. We had Panthers to win the second half by more than 7.5, and we get a try on the buzzer. So that makes up for the one we lost last night with the Eels try on the buzzer, if you ask me. And I reckon we got the game wrong, so I'm happy to get out of that 1-1 because I thought that the Panthers would lap the Cowboys this afternoon, honestly. So credit to North Queensland. It just shows this competition. No result is a given. They came to play. Maybe the Panthers slightly underestimated them, just didn't execute well, but I will give credit to the Cowboys for hanging in tough. But it's still a good win that Penrith was able to gut out because they were actually down 6 in the second half, come back and win it by 12. And our minor premiership bet for the Panthers looking better and better each week. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks again to Clarkey. Alex will be back from his honeymoon of sorts on Wednesday at 6 p.m. and we will preview round 11. Lego.